Montana Territory, spring of 1875. The wind carried the scent of thawing earth and wet pine, but beneath that soft breath of life came something sharper: fear. A baby's cry echoed through the empty hills, high and desperate, cutting across the wide plain like a knife. Elias Booker reined in his mare, Mercy, atop the ridge. From where he sat, he could see the long valley stretched below, the sun glazing the prairie in gold. And there, where smoke and dust tangled, something had fallen in on itself. A cabin, still collapsing. He felt the old ache stir beneath his ribs, that cold throb of memory he never spoke of, and whispered to no one, "Not again." He kicked Mercy forward. The mare leapt down the slope, hooves tearing through loose soil. The nearer he came, the louder the crying grew. Not one but two sounds: the broken sob of a woman and the thin, trembling wail of a child. When he reached the ruin, he swung off before the horse had fully stopped. "Hello?" His voice struck the silence and came back hollow. A moment later, faint words answered from under the wreckage. "Help us, please." Elias dropped to his knees. The cabin's walls had folded in on themselves like paper in a fire. Smoke still hissed from where the stove had burst. He tore his gloves off, wrapped his scarf around his hands, and began to dig. The wood bit at his knuckles. Each pull sent splinters through skin, but he kept on, clearing broken beams and cracked boards, calling through the gaps so the woman would not fade away. "Can you hear me?" A weak yes, then a muffled cough. "My baby. Save my baby first." He froze for a heartbeat, his breath sharp in the cold air. That plea, "Save my baby," sliced clean through him. A flash came quick and merciless. The smell of sickness. A small hand going limp against his arm. The stillness afterward. He bit down, hard, drove the memory back where it belonged, and shoved another board aside. Through the dim split between timbers, he caught sight of her. A young woman, dirt streaked across her cheek, blood on her temple, one arm wrapped tight around a bundle. "Hold on," he said. "I've got you." "Please," she gasped. "Hurry." The roof groaned as if listening. Elias reached farther, but the main beam above her head creaked dangerously. The whole structure trembled. He drew back before it crushed them all. His heart hammered in his throat. He glanced around fast. The fallen yoke, a broken chair, Mercy stamping nearby, restless. He looped his rope through the saddle horn and around a surviving post, tightening the line. "Easy, girl," he murmured. Mercy pawed once, waiting for his word. Elias looked again at the woman's pale face through the hole. "What's your name?" "Lila," she whispered. "Lila Hart." "All right, Lila. I'm Elias Booker. I'm going to pull this beam off, but when I say move, you move. Understand?" She nodded faintly, clutching the child. The rope drew taut. Elias pushed his shoulder beneath a leaning plank, forcing space enough to reach the bundle. Inside the tattered blanket lay a baby boy, eyes half open, skin gray with dust. Elias lifted him carefully into the daylight. The boy cried once, then went silent, head tucked against Elias's chest. "He's alive," Elias said, voice shaking more than he wanted. Lila closed her eyes, lips moving in a soundless prayer. He wrapped the baby in his coat, tucking him near the warm hollow of Mercy's flank, then turned back toward the wreckage. "Now it's your turn." But when he tried to lift the beam, it barely shifted. His muscles strained, hands bleeding, the old wound in his side throbbing like a buried ember. The air filled with the smell of wet wood and fear. Lila reached toward him through the darkness, her fingers trembling inches from his own. "Please," she said again, softer this time. "Please don't let me die." Elias drew a slow breath, forced his shaking hand to steady. "You're not dying today." He stepped back, studying the mess, the ropes, the balance, the one chance he had. "Mercy," he called, voice low but firm. The mare's ears flicked forward. Elias gripped the line and whispered, "Pull." The beam shuddered, shifted an inch, then another. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. Lila cried out as light cracked through above her. The cabin moaned like a living thing in pain. Elias threw himself forward, clawing through the last of the splintered boards, reaching her as the world groaned around them. And then, everything snapped. The roof gave one final scream of wood against wood. Elias seized Lila's arm, dragging her toward daylight, the earth trembling beneath his knees. They tumbled free, just as the cabin folded into itself with a sound like thunder. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind, the horses' wild breathing, and the ragged pulse of 3 hearts still alive. Elias sat back, blood running from a cut at his temple, staring at the wreck. Lila lay on the cold ground, holding her child close, whispering his name through cracked lips. The sun was slipping behind the ridge now, light turning copper and blue. Mercy pawed at the dirt, uneasy. Elias looked down at his torn hands, still trembling. "We're not safe here," he said quietly. "Night's coming fast." He rose, glancing once more at the ruin that could have been their grave, and at the shadow his own fear had left there, waiting. The sky had already begun to fade, clouds gathering like bruises over the ridge. The wrecked cabin groaned with every breath of wind, a wounded thing refusing to die. Elias Booker wiped the blood and dust from his palms and looked at the beam pinning Lila Hart to the ground. It was thick as a man's thigh, heavy enough to crush bone if it shifted again. Her breath came short, but her eyes, gray, steady, never left him. "Save the baby first," she whispered again, though he already had. Noah lay wrapped in Elias's coat beside the horse, a small, soundless bundle. Mercy stood near, nostrils flaring, the rope still hanging loose from the saddle horn. Elias studied the wreckage, running through what was left of his strength, what tools he had, what chance they had. He muttered under his breath, "Ain't leaving you here." He tied the rope around the broken beam, looping it through a splintered post still upright enough to hold. The air was heavy with smoke and sap. He spoke softly to the horse, the way he once did on long patrols when he needed calm more than courage. "Easy, girl. When I say pull, you pull gentle. Mercy flicked her ears, waiting. Elias knelt again beside the gap. You got to trust me, Lila. Her face was pale under the dust. I do, she said, though her voice trembled. He reached for her child's blanket, still caught beneath a plank, and freed it, folding it carefully near her hand. Then, without warning, the cabin creaked deep in its bones. He froze. The sound was the kind a man didn't mistake, the moan right before something gives. He could feel the tremor through the dirt under his knees. The memory came swift. Another house, another roof, another voice screaming his name as the world collapsed. Time 600 PEMs. His right hand shook. For a heartbeat, fear rose sharp as bile. Then came another sound, the faintest whimper from Noah. That tiny cry cut through the noise, the dust, the ache in his chest. Elias drew a breath that felt like a promise. He reached out to Lila, his voice low but steady. When the beam lifts, you crawl. Don't stop. He turned back to Mercy. Now. The mare leaned into the rope, hooves digging deep. The line went taut, creaking under strain. The beam groaned, lifted an inch. Elias shoved his shoulder beneath it, muscles screaming. Wood splintered against his back. Move, Lila! She gasped, dragging herself forward. The baby blanket snagged. Elias grabbed it, tossing it toward her. Go! The beam slipped another inch, the whole frame shuddering above him. He thought he heard the world hold its breath. His vision blurred from the weight pressing down. But then light. A cold rush of air. A hand clutching his sleeve. He pulled her free, stumbling backward into the fading sun. The moment they cleared the threshold, the cabin gave way behind them with a sound like thunder rolling through wood. Boards collapsed in a cloud of dust and sparks. Mercy reared once, the rope snapping loose. Elias and Lila hit the ground hard. For a long second, neither moved. Then he heard her sob, a ragged, living sound. Noah cried from where he lay near the horse, as if answering. Lila tried to crawl toward him, but her leg buckled. Elias caught her before she fell, steadying her carefully. It's all right, he said. You're safe. She looked up at him, eyes swimming, the kind of gratitude that carried both relief and disbelief. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, unable to speak. The cut on his temple burned. The old wound in his side throbbed like a heartbeat out of time. He crossed to Noah, checked his breath, warm, steady, and smiled faintly. Strong little fella, he murmured. When he turned back, Lila was trying to sit upright. You shouldn't move, he said. She ignored him, brushing a trembling hand over her son's cheek. He's all right, Elias assured her. You both are. The sun was bleeding out over the western rim now, throwing the land in copper light. Smoke from the ruined cabin rose thin and gray behind them. Mercy stood silent, waiting for his signal. Elias looked once more at the wreck. Wood, ash, and the ghost of what had been a home. He knew too well the sound of something precious breaking. He rubbed his aching hands together, watching the skin split anew. "We can't stay here," he said softly. Lila glanced up, exhausted but aware. "Where will we go?" He looked toward the distant ridge where the faint line of a trail caught the last of the sun. "There's a town west of here. Red Willow." He hesitated, feeling the first chill of night crawl up his spine. "I'll get you there." As he spoke, the wind shifted, carrying the faint cry of a coyote far off in the dark. The sound rolled through the valley, lonely and long. Elias gathered the baby close, helped Lila to her feet, and for a moment their shadows merged in the dying light. The wreck behind them creaked once more, a soft echo of what was lost. He didn't look back. Some things, if you stared too long, had a way of pulling you under again. The sun had fallen behind the ridge, leaving only the last bruised color of daylight across the hills. Elias Booker gathered what dry timber he could find and built a small fire near the ruins. The flame took slow, cautious bites of the wood, hissing as if remembering the smoke still rising from the broken cabin. He crouched close, warming his raw hands, before turning to the woman lying a few feet away. Lila Hart was awake though pale. Her face bore the streaks of ash and blood, but her gaze stayed clear. Beside her, the baby, Noah, slept against Elias's coat, his tiny breaths visible in the cooling air. Mercy stood tethered nearby, head bowed, snorting into the wind. "You need to drink," Elias said quietly. He knelt and held out his canteen. Lila tried to sit, grimacing as pain shot through her leg. Elias moved instinctively to help, but stopped halfway, unsure if she'd want the touch. She gave a small nod, and he steadied her with a gentle hand behind her shoulder. Her skin felt cold, fragile under his calloused fingers. She sipped the water slowly, trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice carried the weariness of days without rest. "You saved us." Elias shook his head. "Did what had to be done." He adjusted the blanket over her knees and tossed another stick into the fire. The light flickered across his face, carving lines deeper than his age. For a while, neither spoke. The wind slid through the broken timbers behind them, moaning softly, and the scent of rain lingered in the distance. Somewhere out on the plain, a lone wolf called, long and low. Elias poked the fire with a branch, watching sparks drift upward like dying stars. When Lila finally spoke again, her voice was small but steady. "My husband, Calvin, he went into Red Willow 3 days. I'll go for supplies. He should have been back by now." Elias glanced at her, then at the ruined cabin. Maybe the weather slowed him. "Maybe," she said, though doubt shaded the word. She reached toward Noah, fingertips brushing the baby's cheek. "The rain started the morning he left. He wanted to fix the roof before it came again." Her gaze lingered on the wreck, and for a moment her lips pressed tight, as if holding something back. Elias said nothing. He knew better than to crowd grief before it was ready to speak. He focused on her leg instead. The bruise ran deep from thigh to ankle, swelling against the torn fabric of her skirt. He tore a strip from his undershirt, soaked it in water, and tied it gently around the worst of it. Her breath hitched once, but she didn't flinch away. "You done this before?" she asked. "Once or twice," he replied, voice dry as dust. Then quieter. "Long time ago." The fire snapped, bright and sudden, and for an instant his eyes caught the reflection. Haunted. Distant. He looked away, toward the valley beyond. He'd seen too many nights like this. Firelight, blood, the weight of another life in his hands. He could almost hear the echo of his own child's cough, the whisper of his wife's name lost to fever. The ghosts stayed where he kept them, buried deep, but tonight they stirred. Lila watched him a moment, sensing the silence wasn't emptiness, but a wall holding back something heavy. "We're strangers," she said softly, "but I owe you more than I can say." He met her eyes across the flickering glow. "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Hart." "Lila," she corrected faintly. "Please, just Lila." He hesitated, then nodded once. "All right, Lila. You and the boy need rest. We'll head for Red Willow come sunrise." "Can we make it? It's a long ride, but we'll manage." He reached for the saddle blanket, folded it into a rough pillow beneath her head. "You sleep. I'll keep the fire going." Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion finally claiming her. Elias sat beside the flames, the rhythm of her breathing blending with the crackle of the wood. He looked at his torn hands, the thin line of blood across his knuckles, and flexed them slowly. They trembled still, though less now. He glanced once toward the ruins, the ghost of a home black against the silver night. He felt the old unease coil in his chest. Things built on soft ground never held for long. Above him, the first stars came out, cold and sharp. Elias pulled his coat tighter, the baby's faint sigh drifting from the bundle near his boots. The night stretched wide and quiet around them, every sound swallowed by the prairie's endless hush. He didn't know yet if this woman's husband was alive, or if Red Willow held more sorrow than safety. But as the fire burned lower, he found himself making a promise he hadn't spoken aloud. This time, no one would die on his watch. The wind shifted, whispering through the trees like something alive. Lila stirred in her sleep. Elias looked toward the east, where dawn would come, and felt the weight of what waited there. Somewhere out in the dark. Thunder murmured. Dawn crept quietly across the valley, gray first, then pale gold. The fire had long burned out, leaving only a soft curl of smoke. Elias Booker rose from where he'd been sitting half awake, muscles stiff, back aching from the cold ground. The wind smelled of wet soil and pine sap. Somewhere a meadowlark started to sing. For the first time in days, it didn't sound like sorrow. Lila stirred beside the ashes, her face calm but drawn. Noah lay bundled against her, warm in Elias's coat. The boy's small hands flexed as if reaching for sunlight. Elias knelt and checked her leg. Swollen, but the color looked better. "You'll ride today," he said. "I'll walk." Lila shook her head weakly. "You've done enough." He ignored that, as if she hadn't spoken, and began packing their few things. Canteen, rope, a half sack of dried beans he'd found near the wreck. When he lifted what remained of the saddle, a glint caught his eye beneath a splintered board. He reached down and pulled out a small silver locket, its hinge bent but unbroken. He brushed away the dust, and a photograph inside smiled faintly back. A young couple, the woman's hair tied with a ribbon, the man holding her hand as though time might steal her. Elias carried it over and held it out to Lila. Her breath caught. "I thought I'd lost it," she whispered, closing her fingers around it. "My parents. It's all I had left of them." Elias nodded. "Seems it wanted to be found," he said. "Things worth keeping usually do." She looked at him for a long moment, then tucked the locket against her heart. "Thank you." Elias said nothing. He just picked up a fallen timber and jammed it upright into the soft ground beside the ruins. Then he tore a strip from the hem of his shirt, a scrap of red faded by dust and sun, and tied it around the post. It fluttered weakly in the morning breeze. "What's that for?" she asked. "So I can find this place again." He straightened, squinting against the rising sun. "When the ground's dry, I'll come back and set the foundation right. No one deserves a house that falls in on itself." Lila looked away, toward the wreck. "It wasn't the ground," she said softly. "Calvin built it in a hurry. He said we'd make it stronger later." Elias nodded, but didn't answer. Some truths didn't need an echo. He finished tightening the rope on Mercy's saddle, then turned to her. "You ready?" She hesitated, clutching the baby closer. "I don't want to slow you down." "Then hold on tight," he said simply. He lifted her gently, careful of her leg, settling her sideways on the mare. Then he placed Noah in her arms. The boy blinked once, then dozed again. Elias secured their small bundle behind the saddle. They set off down the slope, hooves crunching through the frost-hardened grass. The sun climbed, bright and clean, and with it came the first warmth of the day. From behind, the red cloth flickered like a flame against the ruin, a promise left standing amid ashes. For a time they traveled in silence. The land stretched wide, sagebrush, creek beds, patches of willow glinting where water ran. Lila's voice broke the quiet. "You've lived out here long?" "Long enough to forget the sound of church bells," Elias said. She almost smiled. "Then maybe red willow will sound strange to you." "Maybe." His gaze fixed ahead where the road dipped into a low plain. "But you'll have a doctor there, and shelter. That's what matters." Lila adjusted the blanket over Noah. "He hasn't cried since last night," she said softly. "That's good." "No," she said, frowning. "He was born loud. He only sleeps this quiet when someone hums." Elias's throat tightened. "Your husband?" She nodded. He'd sing to him sometimes. The silence that followed carried weight. Elias glanced up at the open sky, blue now, no clouds left to hide behind. Without thinking, he began to hum, the same tune he'd used to calm the boy before, The sound came rough at first, then steadier. Lila turned, watching him, and in her eyes something shifted. Surprise, then softness, then a grief too deep for words. When the song ended, only the wind answered. They rode on, following the faint track west. By mid-morning, the valley widened. Dust shimmered on the horizon, and far ahead, a sliver of rooftops caught the sun. Elias shaded his eyes. "Red willow," he said quietly. Lila exhaled, part relief, part dread. Calvin should have been there by now. Elias didn't reply. He just kept walking, his shadow stretching long beside the horse. Behind them, the red strip fluttered until distance swallowed it. By the time they reached the edge of Red Willow, the sun was sinking behind the western hills, bleeding the sky into copper and violet. The town rose out of the dust in muted shapes, a row of false-fronted buildings, a blacksmith's forge breathing smoke, and above all, the golden glow of the Copper Lantern Saloon flickering through its warped windows like a heartbeat. Elias Booker led Mercy down the main street, boots dragging softly against the gravel. The few townsfolk who looked up did so in that quiet, measuring way of frontier people, not hostile, not welcoming, just wary. He could feel their eyes following him, then shifting toward the woman and child on his horse. A mother, pale and bruised, clutching her baby close. A man leading the horse with a rope instead of riding. It told its own story before either of them spoke. He stopped in front of the Whitfield boarding house, where a narrow, no-nonsense woman stepped out onto the porch. "Mrs. Whitfield?" Elias asked. "That's me," she replied, eyes flicking from him to Lila. "You're bringing trouble or need?" "Shelter," he said simply. "For the night. She's hurt. The boy needs rest." Something softened in her expression. "Then bring her in." Elias helped Lila dismount, careful of her injured leg. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soap and coffee, a strange comfort after the raw scent of smoke and earth. He set Noah in a cradle near the fire, where the baby sighed once and drifted into sleep. "I'll come back soon," Elias told her. "Need to ask after your husband." Lila's hand brushed his sleeve before she could stop herself. "If you find him, tell him we're safe." "I will." He nodded, but the weight behind her words lingered in the air as he stepped back outside. The Copper Lantern sat at the far end of Main Street, light spilling through its bat-wing doors, music faint under the hum of voices. Inside, smoke swirled beneath low rafters. A piano stumbled through a tune that had forgotten half its notes. Elias's boots echoed on the floorboards as the noise dipped just enough for people to notice. The bartender, a heavy-set man with eyes the color of watered whiskey, squinted. "Evenin'. You look like you've been through hell." Elias leaned on the counter. "Maybe. I'm looking for a man named Calvin Hart. Came through here 3 days ago, maybe 4. The bartender, Fergus, his badge read, scratched his chin. "Hart, you say? Tall, sandy hair, talks big, drinks bigger?" Elias nodded. Fergus's expression darkened. "Yeah, he was here. Played cards back there with a rough lot. Sheriff Ortega had to step in last night when shots were fired. The piano faltered. Elias's voice came low. Was he hurt? Fergus didn't answer right away. He poured 2 drinks, one for himself, one he left untouched. You might talk to Ortega. He's at the jailhouse. Knows more'n I do. Elias didn't touch the glass. Where'd it happen? Back room. Fergus's eyes flicked toward a scarred door near the stairs. They cleaned up most of it, but best not to look. Elias turned, scanning the room. The men playing cards watched him with expressions too careful. One spat tobacco into a tin, muttered something he couldn't catch. The air had changed, thicker now, coiled tight. He left a coin on the bar and stepped outside. The night was sharp, stars pricking through thin clouds. From down the street, a lantern swayed in the window of the sheriff's office. Elias started toward it, but a voice stopped him, a low drawl from the shadows beside the saloon. You the one askin' after Calvin Hart? Elias turned. The speaker was a narrow man with a scar slicing through one eyebrow. His hat shadowed most of his face. Depends who's asking, Elias replied. Name's Crane. Silas Crane. The man's tone carried a lazy menace. Hart's done his share of wrongs. Maybe best you don't go digging too deep. Elias studied him. The half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. The faint smell of smoke and card decks. Appreciate the advice, he said evenly. Suit yourself. Silas tipped his hat, the gesture more warning than courtesy, and slipped back into the dark. Elias stood there a moment, the chill crawling down his spine. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell tolled once, hollow and late. He walked toward the sheriff's office, boots silent on the dirt road. As he reached the door, light flickered from within, and the shadow of a man moved across the wall. Elias paused, fingers brushing the gun at his hip, then pushed the door open. The scent of gun oil and damp wood met him. Sheriff Ortega looked up from his desk, tired eyes beneath a brimmed hat. Evening, Booker. Heard you were back. Elias didn't waste words. Heard there was shootin'. Calvin Hart. He one of the dead? Ortega hesitated, the silence saying more than an answer could. Come inside, he said finally. Elias followed, the door closing behind them with a soft click, sealing out the town's thin music and drawing him into the truth waiting in the dim light. The sheriff's office was dim, lit only by a single lantern that swung from a hook above the desk. Dust drifted in the air, catching the light like falling ash. Sheriff Ortega leaned back in his chair, his face lined deep from years of keeping order in a place that resisted it. Elias Booker stood across from him, hat in hand, boots silent on the worn boards. The silence between them stretched thin before Ortega finally said, Hart's dead, Booker. Shot 2 nights ago. The words didn't surprise Elias, but they landed heavy all the same. He'd known, somehow, from the moment Fergus looked away. Still, he asked, why? Ortega rubbed a hand over his jaw. Depends who you ask. Saloon men'll tell you he was drunk, picked a fight over cards. But there's another story. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window. You'd do better hearing it from Mei Lin. She saw more than anyone. Who's she? Cook at the Copper Lantern. Keeps to herself, but she was there when it happened. Elias nodded once. Then I'll hear it from her. He stepped out into the cold night again. The town had quieted. Only the creak of swinging signs and the murmur of wind through empty alleys. The saloon's back door opened to a small yard, lit by a single coal stove, its orange heart pulsing weakly in the dark. Mei Lin knelt beside it, stirring embers. Her hair was tied in a rough knot, sleeves rolled to the elbows, skin shining with sweat despite the chill. "You're the man asking about Calvin Hart," she said without looking up. "I am." She motioned for him to come closer. "Then you should know, not all stories here get told straight." Elias waited. The fire popped. She finally met his eyes, calm, sad, resolute. Hart was gambling again, lost near everything. Then some men started roughing up one of the Chinese workers from the rail crew. Drunk and cruel, you know the type. She stirred the fire once more, voice tightening. Hart stepped in, tried to stop them, got hit. He pulled a gun, not to shoot, just to scare him. But one of them fired first. "Who?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "Silas Crane's table. Sheriff called it self-defense. Said Hart had it coming." Elias exhaled slowly, the sound halfway between a sigh and a curse. "Didn't strike me as a man who'd stand up for anyone but himself." Mei Lin looked back at the coals. "Sometimes people surprise you at the end." He studied her face, the stillness of someone who'd seen too much truth to waste breath on lies. "You tell Lila yet?" Her eyes softened. "No. That's your road to walk, cowboy." The fire hissed, throwing a red light across her face. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch of coins, placing it near the stove. "For the burial," he said. Mei Lin didn't move to touch it. "You dig deep for people you barely know." He stared into the coals. "Maybe that's the only way to stay human out here." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of burning wood. Then she said quietly, "Tell his wife the truth, but tell it kindly." Elias nodded and turned away, the orange light fading off his back as he crossed the yard. By the time he reached the street again, the wind had turned colder. The lanterns had burned lower, leaving the town dim and watchful. He walked toward the boarding house, boots whispering in the dust. Through a lace curtain, he saw Lila sitting by the window, Noah asleep in her arms. Her face, even in shadow, carried that fragile peace people wear when they're waiting for news they already fear. He stopped at the door. His hand hovered over the latch, then fell away. Lila looked up, maybe hearing the creak of the porch boards, and their eyes met through the glass. She mouthed just one word. "Calvin?" Elias couldn't force the truth through the knot in his throat. He took off his hat and shook his head slowly. Lila closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the child. He turned away into the dark, the wind stirring dust around his boots. Above him, Clouds began to gather again, heavy and gray, promising rain by morning. Tomorrow, he would tell her everything, but tonight, he would let her hold on to one last hour of not knowing. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of light that made everything look older than it was. Rain had passed in the night, leaving the street of red willow slick and shining. Elias Booker stood outside the boarding house, hat dripping, breath white in the chill. He'd barely slept. The truth sat behind his ribs like a stone he couldn't cough up. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and wood polish. Mrs. Whitfield met him at the foot of the stairs, her eyes kind but sharp. "She's in the parlor," she said quietly. "Been waiting since dawn. Hasn't touched her breakfast." Elias nodded, wiped his boots on the mat, and stepped down the hall. The parlor was small, lit by the pale spill of morning through lace curtains. Lila Hart sat by the window, Noah sleeping in her lap. Her hair had been braided, but strands had slipped loose, framing her face in soft disarray. When she turned toward him, there was no question in her eyes, only confirmation of what she already knew. "He's dead, isn't he?" Elias removed his hat. "Yes." His voice came out rougher than he intended. She didn't flinch, didn't weep. She just looked past him, toward the rain streaking down the glass. "How?" He hesitated, then decided the truth was the only mercy left. "There was trouble at the Copper Lantern. He tried to stop some men from hurting a railroad worker. One fired first." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. She stared down at the child in her arms, tracing a finger over his small hand. "Calvin always believed his luck would change. I suppose it finally did." "He died standing up for someone who couldn't," Elias said. That made her look up. There was no relief in her face, but something softer passed through it. Pride, maybe, or forgiveness she hadn't expected to feel. "Then I'll hold on to that," she whispered. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire in the small grate snapped and hissed. Noah shifted, murmuring in his sleep, and Lila pressed a kiss to his head. "What happens now?" she asked at last. "You rest," Elias said gently. "After that, we'll see about a service. Sheriff Ortega can help with the arrangements." She nodded faintly, her hand tightening on the locket at her throat. "He didn't leave much," she said, "but I'll see he's buried right." Elias wanted to tell her she didn't have to do it alone, that she'd done enough surviving for one lifetime. But before he could speak, the door creaked open and a gust of cold air followed a tall figure inside. Silas Crane stood there, hat dripping, eyes bright with something sharp and humorless. "Morning," he drawled. "Heard there's to be a burial. Thought I'd offer condolences." Lila stiffened, clutching Noah closer. Elias rose slowly. "You've said enough." Silas smiled thinly. "Just paying respects. Hard times bring strange company, don't they?" His gaze lingered on Lila a moment too long. "Nice to see someone landed on their feet." Elias took a step forward. The air between them thinned like stretched wire. Walk away, Crane. The other man laughed once, quiet and cold. Didn't mean nothing by it. He tipped his hat and left, boots echoing down the hall. Elias turned back to Lila, who sat motionless, her face pale but composed. Who was that? Just a man who thinks cruelty makes him taller, Elias said. Time for hums. She gave a tired smile. Then he's already small enough. Outside, the rain eased into drizzle. Lila looked toward the light and said softly, I'll need work once this is done. Something steady. I used to teach back east. Maybe the children here need a school. Elias nodded. They do. I can talk to the preacher. He'll find you a room behind the church. Her eyes lifted to his. You'd do that for us? For you, he said quietly. Something flickered between them. Gratitude, sorrow, and the faintest beginning of trust. Lila stood slowly, balancing the sleeping child against her shoulder. Then I'll start again. But I'll need help getting to the church. Elias stepped forward and offered his arm. Always. They left the parlor together, moving down the narrow hall into the cool breath of morning. Outside, puddles mirrored the thin sun breaking through clouds. As they passed the end of the street, Elias caught sight of Silas Crane leaning against a post, watching them go. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder, a promise of trouble yet to come. Elias felt the muscles in his jaw tighten, but Lila's hand rested lightly on his sleeve. Don't, she said softly. He's not worth it. He drew a long breath and nodded. For her, he let it go. For now. The sound of church bells drifted faintly from the hill, carrying through the damp air like a call to begin again. The church bell of Red Willow tolled noon, slow and steady, the kind of sound that made even the wind pause to listen. Elias Booker leaned against the fence, watching as a handful of children chased each other across the churchyard, their laughter bouncing through the cool spring air. Lila Hart stood at the doorway of the small annex behind the chapel, her dress plain, her hair pinned up neatly. Inside, the smell of chalk and pine soap filled the air. It had taken only a few days, a house, for the town to warm to her. The preacher's wife had found her a narrow room behind the church, and Mrs. Whitfield donated an old desk. Elias had hauled in a cracked blackboard and sanded it smooth. Now, for the first time since the cabin fell, Lila looked like she belonged somewhere. He stayed outside for a while, letting the sight settle in him. The sunlight through the window, the faint hum of Lila's voice teaching the alphabet, the baby's soft babble from a basket by her feet. It stirred something deep in him, the memory of mornings long gone, when another woman had sung lessons to another child. He let the ache come and go like breath. When the lesson ended, Lila stepped outside, brushing chalk from her hands. You've been standing there long enough to make the children nervous, she said, smiling faintly. Elias tipped his hat. Didn't mean to. Just making sure the place holds. It'll hold. Her voice carried quiet certainty. We've built it on solid ground. He nodded. That's good. He hesitated before adding, You need anything? More wood for the stove? We have enough, she said. But thank you. Then, after a pause, "Noah's been sleeping better. He listens for your footsteps in the evening." Elias's mouth quirked into a rare, small smile. "That right?" Lila glanced down, color touching her cheeks. "Children know who's kind to them." He didn't answer. Kindness, he'd learned, was a dangerous habit out here. It made you hope. By late afternoon, the churchyard emptied. Elias repaired the steps leading up to the annex, his hands steady now as he worked. The rhythm of hammer and nail soothed him, an honest sound, strong and sure. Behind him, Lila sat under the shade of an old cottonwood, sewing a patch on Noah's blanket. Mei Lin came by with a pot of rice and stew. Samuel Two Moons followed with a wooden stove grate he'd carved. The small community of Red Willow, ragged but kind, had begun to gather around her like threads drawn to warmth. When the sun dipped low, Elias finished his work and set the hammer aside. Lila looked up from her sewing. "You're leaving already?" He brushed dust from his hands. "Got horses to see to before dark." Noah, propped on her knee, reached toward him, tiny fingers grasping the air. Elias froze for a moment, then let the boy clutch one of his rough fingers. The child giggled, a bright, clean sound that pulled a smile out of him before he could stop it. "He likes you," Lila said softly. "Can't say I blame him," he murmured, eyes warm. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that felt like a promise waiting for words. But Elias knew better than to speak too soon. He withdrew his hand gently, nodded to her, and started down the path. As he reached the gate, Lila called after him. "Mr. Booker!" He turned. Her eyes shone in the fading light. "Thank you for giving us a place to begin again." He wanted to say, "You gave it to yourself," but the words stuck. He only touched the brim of his hat and walked on. That night, in the small room behind the church, Lila sat by the window, writing by candlelight. She paused, listening to the wind stir outside, and then tore a small piece of paper from her notebook. On it, she wrote in careful script, "Sunday afternoon, by Red Willow Creek." She folded it, left it on the step of the livery stable the next morning, weighted down with a smooth river stone. When Elias found it, he stood for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. The words were few, but they felt like a door opening, quiet, deliberate, inevitable. He folded the note carefully, tucked it into his vest pocket, and looked toward the hills where the creek ran. The sound of water drifted faintly on the wind, like an echo calling him forward. Sunday came bright and windless, the kind of day the prairie saved for its gentlest moments. Elias Booker followed the dirt path west of town, where the willow trees grew thick along the creek, and their long green fingers trailed across the slow-moving water. The note in his pocket had worn soft from being read too many times. When he reached the bend in the creek, she was already there. Lila Hart sat on a wool blanket spread across the grass, her dress the color of early wheat, her boots off, feet bare against the cool earth. Noah slept beside her in a wicker basket, the baby's curls shining gold in the sunlight. The sight struck Elias harder than he expected, not for its beauty, but for the quiet it carried, the kind he hadn't felt in years. "You came," she said, smiling. "Didn't seem right not to," he replied. His voice came low, uncertain, though his heart had known all along that he would. She gestured toward the basket beside her. "Mrs. Whitfield insisted I bring pie. Said it's bad manners to meet someone by water without something sweet to share." Elias chuckled, lowering himself to the blanket. "Then I guess we'd best be polite." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the rush of the creek and the soft breath of the sleeping child. It felt easy, dangerously easy. Elias kept his eyes on the water, knowing if he looked too long at her, he might forget all the reasons he'd taught himself not to want more. After a while, Lila said quietly, "I never thanked you properly for what you did." "You tried," he said. "That night by the fire. That wasn't enough." Her tone deepened. "You saved us, Elias. Not just from the cabin, but from what came after. The world out here doesn't forgive weakness, yet you, time move hundreds." He shook his head. "I'm no savior. Just a man who couldn't ride past." Her eyes searched his face. "You don't believe in grace, do you?" He hesitated, staring at the sunlight flickering through the branches. "Used to, before the world took it back." Lila said nothing for a while. Then, softly, "I think sometimes it gives it back too, when we're not looking." The words hung between them, light but solid. Elias could feel them settle in the air, in his chest, in the way her voice brushed against something buried deep. Noah stirred, letting out a small cry. Instinctively, Elias reached over, lifting the baby before she could move. He rocked him gently, the motion steady, natural. The old melody slipped out unbidden. That quiet, wordless hum he hadn't dared sing since his own boy died. The sound wove through the air, low and rough, but kind. Lila froze, watching. The baby blinked, yawned, and fell asleep again in his arms. When the last note faded, Elias realized he was trembling. He handed Noah back, eyes turned away. "You used to sing that for someone," she said softly. He didn't answer, only nodded once. She didn't ask more. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, the kind that carried more truth than words could. Lila rested her hand on the blanket, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin, not quite touching. The afternoon drifted into gold. Across the creek, a group of boys shouted as they fished, their laughter rolling like far-off thunder. Lila smiled faintly, eyes on the light. "Maybe this is what peace sounds like," she murmured. Elias followed her gaze. "Never thought I'd hear it again when the tone." Shadows grew longer. He stood, offering her his hand. She took it, her fingers slipping into his palm with quiet trust. He helped her up, steadying her as Noah woke and whimpered softly. "Thank you for coming," she said. He met her eyes. "You knew I would." A breeze rippled the water, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant dust. From the hills beyond the town came the faint echo of laughter, or maybe mockery, rough voices from men drinking early at the copper lantern. "People talk," Lila said suddenly, not looking at him. "About you helping me. About us. They wonder what a man like you wants with a woman like me." Elias's jaw tightened. "People talk because their lives are small. Let 'em." She looked at him then, really looked, and something bright and dangerous flickered in her eyes. "And what do you want, Elias?" He started to answer, but stopped. The air shifted. The moment trembled between them. Too near, too honest. Then the wind picked up, sending a shimmer across the creek, breaking the reflection of the sky. "Careful," he said finally, voice quiet, rough. "Water's deeper than it looks." She smiled at that. Not mocking, just knowing. "So am I." They stood there a moment longer, neither moving, until Noah fussed again, breaking the spell. Lila gathered her things, and together they walked back toward town, side by side but silent. Behind them, the creek whispered on, its voice low and endless, carrying the sound of something that wasn't yet love, but was close enough to remember. The wind carried the smell of rain that evening, cool and restless, sweeping through the narrow streets of Red Willow. Elias Booker sat beneath the eave of the church annex, a block of cedar resting against his knee, his knife moving slow, deliberate. Each stroke carved out the rough shape of something, a horse maybe, or a dream too long unspoken. The rhythm steadied him, the scrape of blade against wood like a heartbeat he could control. The day had been long. The whispers had grown louder. Talk of a widow too friendly with a ranch hand. Talk of a man too dark-skinned, too quiet, too close. Elias had weathered worse, but it stung sharper when the words brushed against someone else's name, against hers. He didn't hear her at first. Only when a soft voice broke the hush did he look up. "You work too hard after sundown," Lila said. She stood at the bottom of the steps, shawl pulled tight, Noah asleep against her shoulder. "Work keeps the mind from wandering," Elias said, setting the knife aside. "Maybe it's meant to wander sometimes," she replied. Her eyes caught the lamplight, tired, gentle, and impossibly brave. He reached for the small carving, turning it in his hands. "Ain't much yet," he said. Lila climbed the steps slowly, limping less now, and sat beside him. She studied the piece in silence, a half-formed shape, tender and uncertain. "It's enough," she said. Then she took something from her pocket, the silver locket, its surface dulled by time and fire. She placed it carefully in his palm. "Hold this for me." He frowned. "That's yours." "It was, but now it's safe with you." Her gaze lingered on his face. "A house, a heart. They're only as strong as the hands that keep them." Elias's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His hand shook slightly as he closed it around the locket. She must have seen it, because her voice softened. Still trembles? He exhaled. Sometimes. Why? He hesitated, then answered the way a man might cut open an old scar, careful but final. Because the last time I held a child this small, he didn't wake up, fever took him. Took her too. I couldn't dig fast enough. His voice dropped lower. When I heard Noah crying under that roof, I thought, maybe I was hearing ghosts. Lila's eyes glistened. And you still went in. I had to. He looked away, jaw tight. But after, when you asked me to stay, it scared me. Still does. Because of him. Because of wanting again. He met her gaze, raw and open now. A man can live without love if he kills the wanting. But I don't know how to stop it anymore. The words hung there, quiet and dangerous. Lila reached over, her hand covering his. Elias, we don't owe the past anything. We only owe each other kindness now. He looked down at their hands, her fingers fine and pale against his scarred ones, the locket between them like a heartbeat shared. From the cradle, Noah stirred and whimpered. Lila started to move, but Elias lifted the child first, rocking him gently. The old tune came again, low and rough, the one that once belonged to his grief. Only this time, it didn't ache. It healed. Noah sighed and settled, small head resting against his chest. Lila watched them, tears bright but peaceful. He trusts you, she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. He's got good sense. For a long while they sat beneath the eave, rain tapping soft on the roof. The lamplight swayed, painting gold across her face, across the child's small curls, across the hands that no longer trembled. Then, from the street below, a shadow moved, a figure lingering where the light didn't reach. Silas Crane, hat low, cigarette glowing faintly between his teeth. His voice drifted up, dry and mocking. Careful, Booker. Houses built too close to fire got a way of burning again. Elias didn't move, didn't even turn. He only said, calm and cold, "Evening, Crane." The man chuckled, flicked ash to the wind, and disappeared into the dark. Lila shivered. Elias wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Ignore him," he said quietly. "Some men need to break things to feel taller." She looked at him, eyes deep and certain. "Then let's build something taller still." He nodded once, slow, steady. "Tomorrow, I start the frame for your new house. But this time," he said, glancing toward the night where Crane had vanished, "we'll dig the foundation deep." The rain thickened, drumming softly on the roof. A promise, not a warning. The dawn broke soft over Red Willow, the kind of morning that carried both chill and promise. Mist clung to the creek, curling around the cottonwoods like old ghosts, refusing to leave. Elias Booker stood barefoot in the damp grass, shovel in hand, eyes on the horizon, where sunlight was still deciding whether it would stay. The land in front of him was uneven, half grass, half clay, stubborn earth, but not impossible. He pressed the blade of the shovel into the soil, and the sound it made, metal biting ground, rang clear and certain. You build deep, he told himself, or you build for nothing. By the time the first smoke curled up from the church's chimney, Elias had already marked the perimeter. He'd cut cords of wood to measure the frame, dug 4 pits for the corner posts. The air smelled like iron and sweat, the kind of smell that stays in a man's hands even after washing. "Morning looks good for building," came a familiar voice. Samuel 2 Moons approached, tall and steady, a wagon behind him stacked with timber and nails. "Morning looks good for anything honest," Elias said, wiping his brow. 2 Moons stepped beside him, studying the trench. "You plan to live here long?" Elias hesitated, looking out toward the water. "If the ground lets me." 2 Moons grinned. "Ground don't decide that. People do." He tossed him a hammer. "Let's make it last." They worked in silence, the kind born of men who understood the weight of stillness. Elias dug. 2 Moons braced each trench with rock and timber, their rhythm slow but sure. From time to time they'd pause to rest their backs, drinking from the same tin flask without words. By mid-morning, the sound of a woman's voice drifted from the path, soft, steady, carrying the faint hum of a lullaby. "Time for hums." Lila Hart came into view, Noah in her arms, a basket of food on her hip. The sun caught in her hair, turning it the color of honey left too long in the jar. "You'll wear yourselves down before noon," she said, her tone half reproach, half affection. "Can't help it," Elias answered. "The earth's kind to those who meet it early." Lila smiled. "Then I'll meet it too." She spread a blanket beneath the cottonwood, setting Noah down among wildflowers. The child's laughter carried through the air, small and pure, the sound of something unbroken. Elias found himself glancing over every few minutes, though he tried not to. Lila's presence had a gravity that unsettled him. Each time she bent to soothe Noah, he felt it, the quiet steadiness of someone rebuilding from the inside out. By noon, Sheriff Ortega rode by, dust rising around his horse. "Didn't take you for a builder, Booker," he called out. "Didn't take myself for one either," Elias replied. Ortega dismounted, handing over a coil of rope. "You'll need this for the crossbeams, and a man can't raise walls alone." Mei Lin arrived not long after, a pot of soup in her arms, apron flapping in the breeze. "Fuel," she said simply, setting it near the work site. Her eyes softened when she saw Lila. "Red Willow's quieter since you came, Miss Hart." "Maybe it's just listening," Lila said. Mei Lin smiled. "Then build it something worth hearing." Together, they ate in the shade, soup, bread, and laughter filling the air where once there had been only wind. It wasn't grand, but it was whole. The kind of moment that sneaks up on people who've forgotten to expect peace. After lunch, the work resumed. Elias set the corner posts himself, one by one driving them deep until each groaned against the pull of earth. He measured the crossbeams twice, cut once, and when the sun dipped lower, the skeleton of the house stood. 4 upright walls, and a frame that caught the light like an open prayer. Lila approached quietly, Noah now sleeping in her arms. She looked up at the frame, her eyes wide with something between disbelief and gratitude. "It's real," she whispered. "It's starting," Elias said. She stepped closer. "You dug the foundation deeper than most men would. Most men ain't been buried by their own walls before," he said, his voice low. "And this one'll hold." The wind stirred, lifting the scent of rain from the west. Lila reached into her basket and pulled out a small piece of red cloth, the same one he'd tied to the cabin ruins weeks ago. "I kept it," she said softly. "Thought it might belong here." Elias took it from her, fingers brushing hers. "Then it'll mark the first nail," he said. He climbed the frame and tied the cloth to the highest beam, where it fluttered against the sky like a heart refusing to quiet. When he climbed down, she was smiling through tears. "You remember everything, don't you? Only what matters." He reached into his pocket then, pulling out something small, a ring carved from cedar, the grain glowing faintly in the light. "Didn't mean to make this," he said. "It just came out that way while I was whittling." She stared at it, breath caught. "Elias." He took her hand gently, slipping the ring into her palm. "You don't owe me a promise, but if you ever wear it, I'll take it as one." "What promise would that be?" "That you'll stay when the wind gets rough." She met his gaze. "Then you'll have to promise the same." He nodded once, the kind of nod that carried weight. "You have my word." For a long moment, they stood like that. 2 survivors, the creek whispering behind them, the frame of their future rising between. But peace, like weather, never stayed long on the plains. A horse's whinny broke the silence. "Storm's comin'," Samuel Two Moons said, pointing west. The sky there had gone strange, lightless and heavy, clouds stacked black on black. "We can brace it before dark," Elias said. They worked fast. He and Two Moons drove stakes, tied beams, sealed gaps. Rain came sudden and hard, drumming the roof like a drumbeat of warning. Lila gathered Noah and ran for the wagon, while Elias hammered the last crossbar into place, muscles burning, soaked to the bone. When the wind howled, it carried more than rain. It carried memory. Elias saw, in flashes, the cabin that had collapsed, the faces he couldn't save. He froze just for a second, and the hammer slipped from his hand. Then Lila's voice cut through the roar. "Elias!" He turned. She stood in the doorway of the half-built frame, hair soaked, eyes fierce. "It's different this time," she shouted over the wind. "You're not alone." The words struck deeper than any blow. He grabbed the hammer again, drove the last nail home, and the sound of it echoed like thunder made solid. The storm raged for hours, but the frame held. When it was over, the world fell quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man believe in beginnings. Water dripped from the rafters. Steam rose from the wet ground. Lila stepped out, Noah still asleep against her shoulder, and looked up at the walls that had refused to fall. "You built it true," she said. Elias ran a hand over the timber, feeling the steadiness beneath his palm. "No," he said softly. "We did." She reached for his hand, the cedar ring catching the light between them. "Then let's finish it together." He nodded, rain still dripping from his hair, eyes fixed on the horizon where the clouds beckoned to break. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like something to fear. It looked like shelter. The storm had ripped through the valley with a sound like the sky breaking apart. Wind clawed at the rafters, rain slammed against the shutters, and thunder rolled so close it seemed to shake the bones of the earth. Yet when dawn came, the air stilled, soft and washed clean. Elias Booker stood on the porch, his boots half sunk in the mud. The land before him steamed under the pale light, the ground dark with rain but firm beneath his feet. He lifted his head slowly, heart thudding once, twice, then easing. The house still stood. Every beam, every nail, every promise had held. Behind him came the faint creak of floorboards. Lila stepped out, wrapped in a shawl, her hair unbound and damp, face pale from the long night. She leaned on the doorframe, eyes tracing the unbroken lines of the roof. "It's still here," she whispered, as if saying it too loud might undo it. Elias turned to her. "So are we." A breath of laughter escaped her, small and trembling. "You always say that like you built it out of more than wood." He smiled, tired and gentle. "Maybe I did." Inside, the fire burned low, throwing a faint gold against the new walls. Noah slept near it in his cradle, the same one Elias had carved from leftover cedar, smooth and sturdy, smelling faintly of the wild tree it came from. The baby's chest rose and fell in the rhythm of peace hard-earned. Lila knelt beside the cradle, brushing a lock of dark hair from the baby's forehead. "He didn't even stir through it all," she murmured. "He trusts the roof," Elias said, "and the hands that made it." They sat together in the warmth of that morning, a silence between them full of gratitude and disbelief. The rain tapped gently now, a soft echo of what had been fury just hours ago. Time 500 mums. From outside, the world seemed to hold its breath, the creek murmuring, the cottonwood leaves dripping silver. When Lila rose, she carried something to the window, the small piece of red cloth she had saved all this time. The edges were torn, faded by smoke and weather, but she tied it to a nail above the frame anyway. "So we don't forget," she said simply. Elias looked up at it. The same color that had marked ruin once, now glowing like the pulse of life. "Not much of a flag," he said. "Just enough to say we made it," she replied. The door opened behind them, letting in the scent of wet sage. Samuel Two Moons appeared first, hat dripping, grin wide. "Figured I'd check if you were still standin'." "Both the man and the house," Elias said. Mei Lin followed close, her arms full of a fresh loaf wrapped in cloth. "Every new home needs bread," she said, "and a blessing." She crossed herself in her quiet way and set it by the hearth. Even Sheriff Ortega came by, stoic as ever, his voice softer than usual. "Town's talkin'. Storm flattened 2 barns, but your house didn't move an inch." Folks say it's a sign. Maybe just good nails, Elias replied. Ortega's smile was brief but real. Or good hands. When they left, the little house felt fuller somehow. Not from the gifts or words, but from the air they'd left behind. Warmth. Community. The kind of quiet belonging Elias hadn't felt in years. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Elias sat outside again. The cottonwoods swayed above the creek, its leaves whispering the softest sound, not unlike prayer. Mercy grazed nearby, old and slow, her silver mane stirring in the breeze. Lila joined him, folding her shawl across her lap. The sky burned gold and lavender. "You think it'll last?" she asked. Elias took a long breath, his gaze following the line of the roof, the strong beams catching firelight from the windows. "The house?" he asked. "The peace," she said. He thought a moment. "It'll bend, like everything living does. But I built the walls deep. They'll stand." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You built me deeper too, you know." He smiled at that, the sound quiet but steady. "You just remembered what was already there." Inside, Noah woke and began to hum. Not cry, but hum, soft and tuneless. The same sound Elias had made once, long ago, when he'd lost everything. He rose and went to him, lifting the boy gently into his arms. The old tune found him again, low and rough at first, then full. Lila leaned against the doorway, watching. Her eyes soft, her smile small but certain. As the song faded, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. "Do you ever think about that day, when the cabin fell?" she asked. Elias looked toward the red cloth in the window. "Every time I draw breath," he said, then quieter. "But I don't see ruin anymore. I see where the world decided to start over." She stepped closer, touching his arm. "And you?" He glanced down at Noah, whose fingers were curled around his shirt. "Me," he said, voice rough with tenderness. "I was just a man digging through wreckage, not knowing I was looking for my heart." They stood together then, as dusk settled across Red Willow. A man, a woman, and a child, bound by something stronger than survival. The storm had tested them and found them worthy. Outside, the cottonwood whispered again, its roots deep, its branches alive with the shimmer of new light. Time 400 mems. The house stood firm, its foundation dry, its frame humming faintly with the sound of love made real, quiet, enduring, and unshaken. And as night deepened, Elias Booker closed his eyes to the rhythm of the creek and thought, "Love doesn't end the storm. It just teaches you how to stand inside it. When the storm settles and the heart finds calm, love remains, strong, steady, and true." If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe for more heartfelt Western tales, and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your memories of love, courage, and second chances.